My first language is Spanish. So when I came here, I didn't know the language, and it was very difficult. Because I always been like, a spark of energy. I'm always talking to people, interacting with everyone. But when I came here into the education system, the teachers used to tell me that if I didn't know the language, I couldn't speak. So it was very hard for me to be myself and show people who I really was. Because again, I love talking. I love meeting new people, making conversations. So not being able to speak to anyone because I didn't know the language was very hard. None of the teachers looked like me, and they used to tell me that if I didn't know English, this was America, I couldn't speak in class. So for a very long time, I stopped talking around the adults in school or, anybody for that point, because again, I didn't want them to judge me or tell me, well, you don't know the language, so you shouldn't be speaking. And I turned to books because books couldn't judge me and they couldn't tell me, that nobody understood what I was saying. And it took a lot for me to in the beginning because again, they used to tell me, "Oh, you can't speak in class because you don't know the language," but I didn't understand what they were saying. So it's like you're telling me to do something, but I don't understand what you're asking me to do because you are right. I don't know the language. So it was a lot to, it was a struggle for me. And that's when I turned to books and I stopped talking for almost a year and a half in school, unless it was like with my friends or like when the adults were not around because they couldn't tell me to stop talking because it was in the language that was expected for me to speak in school. And I used to go to the library aisles, during lunchtime, I used to escape and go to the tiny rooms where I knew that the adults couldn't tell me what to do. And I was able to express myself and just be me.
Mm. I had a sort of similar experience, but not quite with my teachers per se, just with the community, the surrounding community would be like, call us spick.
But yeah, that
And
I got called that many times.
you got that call to, yeah. So people sometimes don't believe that people who aren't necessarily like, I'm not ancient and I live this. And I'm glad that you're also sharing how you live that because that was a thing. And, look at us. At least now we have both languages. So, I think it all worked out for us. But it is an attack at a person's identity, culture, but also a way to erode their self-esteem and their desire to communicate, because I also lived that whole period of a lot of quietness. So I could relate. When I was reading your bio, I was like, oh man, I live this. And I did also turn to books. I used to have my dictionary and I would look up words and a thesaurus and I learned the language in that fashion where I had to learn so much about how do you pronounce it, the symbols on the dictionary and all of that. So I became like you, very hyper focused. Um, and so I can see how all of that impacted who I became.
I used to literally walk into the library and like pick the prettiest covers of the books and just make up my own stories according to the pictures. And then in class, I was just like, the teacher would be like, well, you're not paying attention, you're not focused. And then to a point, to an extent, I wasn't paying attention because I was trying to remember the words that I saw in the book so I can remember the spelling and therefore eventually, find out what they meant in Spanish. And I would go back and I used to get so excited. I'm like, oh, I remember that word. This is what it means. So I used to go back to the same books over and over again. I'm like, oh, so I was right, even though I was creating my own story from the pictures, at some point they clicked. Because like, oh, to some extent I did understand what the story was about, even though if I didn't know what all the words were.
Yes, yes. And that's the beauty of imagination and having an intellect, right? Where you start connecting your surroundings and your lived experience. I mean, I really love that. And I'm hearing that, that voice isn't just about speaking, right? But it's also about giving yourself the permission to kind of experience what was going on and make your own interpretation and build your own knowledge base, that whole ability to, okay, you don't want me to talk, but I'm going to have these conversations, even if they started as that inner voice and inner chatters. So in some way, I guess it strengthened your resolve, because you're not like giving up. You're like, I'm looking this up.
But I used to tell myself, like, I'm going to learn how to read this book. I'm going to figure it out. And they can't tell me anymore that I can't speak. And they literally started speaking one day. One of the teachers was like, she looked at me like, where's that voice coming from? Because again, I stopped talking, so they probably forgot what the sound of my voice was. So it was interesting to be like, how in the world was she speaking in English right now? So it was like
Yes.
an aha moment for them. And it was also an aha moment for me because like, yeah, I told you I was gonna get it done. It took me a while, but I knew I was gonna do it.